Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the American Federation of Teachers, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar on mentoring new teachers in the innovative age. My name is Susan Ward, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to present our presenter, Ms. Julie Stern, who is our contact leader for the Share My Lesson website and an independent author as well as a teacher trainer. You can read her bio on the right side of your screen. Thank you, Julie. You can take it away, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Susan. It's great to be here with all of you. It's incredible. I've been reading where people are from. Most people from the United States, but we also have Canada, New Zealand, some different places in Latin America I saw. It's incredible. So good morning, good evening, wherever you are, good afternoon, and thank you for being here. So I'm just going to kick it right off by asking you all a multiple choice question about why you signed up for today's webinar. So which of these reasons is your main reason for signing up? Are you a new teacher? I just want to see who's out there. Are you a mentor of new teachers? Do you supervise new teachers? Are you more of a supervisor role? Maybe you're just here because you're none of those and you just like to learn and grow. Or you can say none of the above and let us know. So as soon as you should hear a little ding and the poll question should pop up, and I'm going to give a few seconds for people to answer it. But if you answer it quickly, tell us in the group chat, what made you sign up? What kind of role you serve? Are you a supervisor? Are you a principal? Maybe we have some professionals, some professors. Okay, I see one person, Rochelle, says she's a student teacher. Awesome. So that's great. I see Judith saying she's getting old and new techniques. That's great. So I'd like to give a few seconds for people to answer the poll question. Oh, so we do have first-year teacher, department head, academic intervention coach. Great. Oh, mentor international teachers in the Dominican Republic. I'm about to move there, so whoever that was, please email me. All right, great. So we have lots of different people. A union representative, nice. Let's see, our majority are people who are mentors, or they just, people who just like to learn and grow, which is great. So thank you guys so much for participating in that first poll. And then the next question I have for you is really just, it's not a poll question. You don't have to answer this publicly. I'm just wanting you to take a second to think through how engaged you'll be in today's webinar. So I'm a mom of 2 small kids, so I'm often multitasking, sort of half listening to podcasts or different things like that or the news. So I wanted you to just sort of take a second and think about, am I going to be all in, ready to make a usable plan? That would be like a 5, or a 1 would be sort of half listening. And if you're a 4 or a 5, maybe you want to grab a paper and a pen to get ready, because I'm going to ask you some reflection questions and ask you to even make a plan. So if you want to be all in, grab some paper and a pen, or if you prefer, you can use technology. And then here's the next poll question. Which of these is true for you? So A would be this statement: many young adults today are entitled and don't want to work hard. B would be older adults always complain about young adults. This is nothing new. C might say both A and B are somewhat true. And D would be none of the above. And so I just want to see which of these things are true for you. And if you answer the poll quickly, you submit your answer, just type into chat about why you chose the answer that you chose. And I ask this question because millennials get such a bad reputation. In fact, when I've been going around just telling people, hey, I'm thinking about writing a book on mentoring millennial teachers, and I've heard things like, why? Just tell them to put on their big girl panties and just get over it. Another person said, you can't mentor millennials. And so I didn't put the word millennials in the title because, it's just about mentoring new teachers in general. But I wanted to see sort of where people were on this, so I asked this as a poll question. So let's see the results. All right, both A and B are somewhat true. That's probably where I am as well, because there are some things that the current sort of young adult generation have that are different than other generations. So just out of transparency, I was born in the late 70s, very late 70s. So by some definitions, I'm technically Generation X or Millennials. Maybe even some people might say I'm a millennial because it was very late 70s I was born. But there's just such a bad rap. A lot of people say, I don't want to label myself as a millennial because they have such sort of a bad reputation. And so I just wanted to see where you guys were on this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the different generation and generational characteristics. I'm really just sort of pragmatic about it. And so these are my two boys. And this, I think, is really what it's all about. That it's not about baby boomers or Generation X or millennials, but it's about the generation that we're teaching. And so I think about my two young boys and the world that they are going to enter. So this is Alex and Andrew. Alex is 4 and Andrew's 2. They're being googlers right here in their little outfits for their aunt's wedding coming up. And I just think about what life will be like when they graduate from high school. And so I think what happens is really interesting. One of my favorite things that I read about millennials or the young generation is that they didn't fall from the sky, that the baby boomers were their parents, or Generation X were their parents. And so all the complaining that we hear about the young adults today, we have to remember that they were raised by the people who are complaining about them. And so I think one of the reasons that we see a big difference I'm experiencing myself with these two boys, and that is as women have entered the workforce at record numbers, parenting has become harder and harder. And as work has extended into the home through smartphones and through computers, it's become harder and harder to give your all to your children. And so, an example for me is sometimes it's just easier just to give them what they want than it is to let them cry and let them sort of work through that frustration. And the result is, as people are saying, that you get some young adults who don't like the feeling of frustration, who want instant gratification. And I think that, as a mom, it's something that I'm constantly working on, how to give these children empathy and at the same time teach them patience and kindness and clear boundaries. And so that's, I think, something that's really hard. And the world is super complicated. And so here's our learning intentions for today. We will understand that we all need continuous growth as we teach Generation Z, and I've just heard this word recently called alphas. When we're talking about the kids who are currently in K through 12 school right now, we all need to do continuous growth, and they're the focus, not on the adults. And then the next thing is we'll reflect on our learning and our development to glean key insights for new teachers. And then finally, my hope is that we'll collaborate with new teachers to harness their knowledge and their experiences. Those are my main things. And so if you would please comment, I see some people are commenting in the group chat, which of these things are you most excited about? And if you're watching this via recording, you can tweet. So you can reach me on Twitter at Julie H. Stern, and I'd love to hear your comments. But I'm wondering what people think about these learning intentions and which ones you think you might be excited about. So some people are saying, all right, I love that we have some baby boomers on the live webinar. We all have our moments, says Julie McMillan. You're right. Yeah, we all have our moments of being frustrated or procrastination, things like that. This is great. And somebody saying, I want insight. I want all three. This is great. Thank you for your sharing. And so this is my grandmother, Audrey Harris. She was a teacher. She was a teacher for nearly 30 years. And I think about what the world was like when she was a teacher and how much the world has changed. So she would have been part of what's known as in the United States as the silent generation. So when she was a teacher, there was fixed intelligence. There were the smart kids and the not so smart kids, or you could say dumb kids. And you knew who they were roughly by kindergarten, first, second grade, and they were who they were. And that was socially acceptable, and the scientific belief at the time was that intelligence was innate. There was a lot less diversity. She taught in segregated schools in Louisiana, and so she faced less diversity in the sense of demographics than a lot of us face. It was about quantity of school. If you didn't get it, then you went to after school, you went to summer school, or you repeated grades, and that's changed a lot. And it was simple techniques. Basically, she went to college in her 20s, and she learned how to be a teacher, and there wasn't this ongoing professional development like you all are participating in today. And there was a set amount of knowledge and skills. She knew what the kids needed to know, and she was going to teach them what she knew and what she was able to do. And I think all 5 of these things have changed dramatically. So if you could, just take a minute to think about, and if you would like to put it into the chat, you can go ahead. Which of these 5 things that were the reality when my grandmother was a teacher have changed the most, or which of these changes impacts you or even concerns you the most? Which of these things? So the first one is, of course, we know that the brain can actually grow with effort, and kids can learn a lot faster given the right tools, given the right conditions, that it's not just nature versus nurture, but that it's an interplay between what kids are born with and what kind of environment they're exposed to. I read the other day that, beginning at number 2, 1 in 4 kids doesn't speak English at home in the United States. And so the idea of English language learners becoming a bigger portion of our population. It's not about the quantity of school, but it's about the quality of school. How do we get school to be higher quality? And it's very complex. I think now we all accept that teaching is both an art and a science, and there's no one way to do it. And probably a variety of tools in our toolbox is the best way. We have to continue to grow. And then number 5 is about, we don't know what the world's going to be like whenever these kids graduate. And so the idea that we are preparing them and just sort of pouring knowledge into their heads has changed a lot. So I'm seeing you guys talking to each other in the chat section, so thank you for that. And so I want to ask, what comes to mind when you see this image? It's of Times Square. There's a bunch of street signs going different ways. What comes to mind if you could just put into the group chat? To me, this image is representative of the 21st century. Somebody says confusion, chaos. I put complexity into Google Images, and this is what came up. Complexity. It was one of my favorite images that I saw, because I think, there's a lot of different directions. It's very busy. There's a lot of possibilities is one way to look at it. Another one saying overload. Lots going on. And there's just a touch of nature there with the pigeon on top of that sign. And if you even get real technical, the pigeon is standing on a sign that says no standing anytime, which is just kind of ironic and funny. But I think this is representative of the 21st century. And I love all the things that you all are saying. Is choices, possibilities, or some more positive things people are saying, but a lot of other people are saying overwhelm or lost, confusion. And so this is sort of, to me, what represents a bit of the 21st century that we're living in. And then when I read about, and I read Wired magazine, and I read lots of different technology blogs, and I'm constantly trying to stay abreast of what's happening, what's coming, what are the changes. And, just virtual reality is something that I saw the trailer to a movie where there's some virtual reality. It's probably already in theaters, but I just remember thinking there's some virtual reality game and sort of the end of the world is come about, and this guy has to like save the world via this virtual reality. And that actually is not that far fetched if you pay attention to what's happening in technological advancement. And where this matters for young people especially is the World Economic Forum issued a report where they cited 65% of today's kindergarten students are going to take jobs that don't yet exist. 65% of today's kindergartners are going to take on jobs that today don't yet exist. And so I just think thinking about that is really impactful for the future. And I wonder how many of you know about blockchain. So blockchain, you probably have heard of the term Bitcoin, but blockchain is a new technology that's coming out that is predicted to, within the next 5 to 10 years, revolutionize things from banking to medical record keeping and all kinds of other record keeping, but even democracy, even trying to get, that's the movie, thank you, Ready Player One. That's the movie that I saw, the preview, and I said, actually, that's not that far-fetched from the technology that's coming available now. Future of Humanity Institute out of Oxford does all of these reports in artificial intelligence, in blockchain, and what the future holds for technology and how it's going to disrupt so many different industries that we don't even think about. I like this person put in there, blockchain, question mark? Yeah, exactly. What even is it? I have spent a long time trying to figure out what is it. It's very interesting. And so I'll just say that it's something that is going to disrupt a lot of industries. And so it's something that we have to keep in mind. The future is really, really interesting. And then the last thing I'll say on this is that the rise of artificial intelligence and robots. And I read a lot of reports about this and watched some different videos about it. And one professor out of Brown University predicts that within the next 10 years, robots are going to diagnose cancer and perform the surgery for the cancer. And so it's not just simple jobs that are going to be automated in the future and going to be taken over by technology. And it's a lot more than that. And so one research report that I read just this morning, this is a UK-based economic research group called PwC. They say 40% of jobs in the United States are going to be lost to automation or robots in the next 15 years. 40%. And so that's something that we really need to think about. And the main thing that's coming about as I hear and read and listen and talk to experts on the rise of technology in the world is the importance of ethics, ethical thinking, and critical thinking. And that's something that I think really impacts teachers. How often are we thinking about teaching really purposefully critical thinking and ethical reasoning? I'd say I don't spend that much time thinking too much about ethics, and I think that's a very interesting point. Now, after I went through all of that heavy stuff, and some of you even said in the chat, like, I don't even know what she's talking about, which is fine. I just sort of wanted to get some background into how much the world is changing, but just to add some playfulness, I thought I'd put up a few different little funnies. So this lady is sitting here telling her husband, I assume, maybe the world isn't getting less friendly. Maybe you're just getting grumpier. And so I found that to be somewhat of a funny, tongue-in-cheek way to say, you know what, throughout the ages, even before the time of Jesus, the older generations have been complaining about the younger generations not being responsible enough, and all of those things that we hear today. And so I think it's important for us to remember that it's normal for us to complain. And then here's some responses that I saw in an article from Millennials. This is from Twitter. So this person, Sophie, writes, "Kids these days have it too easy," said the generation that could buy a house on a wage from unskilled work at age 21. And so I thought that was really interesting, what they called, the article was called Comebacks from Millennials, like against us older people and are complaining about them, because the economy has changed so much, and the younger generation cannot afford the house with the 2-car garage that a lot of older generations, our parents' generations, could afford. And then this one is kind of funny, kind of silly. Baby boomer, why are there holes in your jeans? Did you rip those yourself? Me, smart and woke, why are there holes in the ozone? Did you rip those yourself? And I just thought that was really funny, and I'm going to include that here to really sort of get at the idea that young people have, in general, we can't say one thing about any generation. That would be a gross overgeneralization. So what I'm saying is just in general, younger generations want purpose. They deeply care about the environment and about equality or equity. And so that's something that they're more concerned about in general than, let's say, Generation X. They tend to be, and these are just some statistics, so it's not sort of overgeneralizations. They're more diverse, racially diverse. They tend to delay marriage and having kids much longer than previous generations. They have more college education than previous generations, and so that's something interesting, is that they're more educated, but the sort of debt and lack of assets, like a house, is worse, and so that's really interesting. And they also tend to be to live in cities and be more urban than previous generations. So those are some basic things about the current generation that are important for us to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, is the glass half full or half empty? And so I think that's something that's one of my main messages, is that regardless of true complaints, and I'll tell you, one professor told me a story about a college student who emailed her and said, I want to talk about my grade. I don't like the grade that you gave me. I want a better grade. And she responded and said, okay, let's schedule an appointment. And the student replied, no, email works best for me. And for my generation, that is super disrespectful to a professor. I was shocked. And she could tell me story after story after story like that. And so there are some things that, are worth complaining about. But as you all said into the chat earlier, is that there's things we can complain about everybody, including ourselves. And so the power of positivity is something that I think is really important to emphasize when we're talking about mentoring new teachers. And it's not just, fluff. I mean, people with a more positive outlook are healthier, they're more successful on nearly every metric that you might want to use to measure success. In fact, a study from Johns Hopkins University said that families with a history of heart disease, a researcher measured sort of people's outlook, and people with a more positive outlook versus a more negative outlook were a third less likely to sort of have any complications related to heart disease, even with a family history of heart disease. And so I think it's really important for us to reframe our conversations whenever we hear things or go down the path of complaining about either generation, younger people complaining about older or older people complaining about younger, that we really try to reframe and think about what positive aspects each generation brings to each other. And so that leads us to our first real reflection. And so what I'm going to do is play for you all just some music for about a minute so that it's not total silence. And so I'd love for you guys to really reflect. For those of you who are mentoring classroom teachers, you don't have to be all things for a new teacher. And so I think it's important, those of you who are mentoring teachers, is to really reflect on your strengths. Are you really great at engagement? Are you really great at content knowledge? I know as a young teacher, I just felt that older teachers had so much content knowledge for the discipline that I was teaching. Are you really good at making relationships with parents? Are you really good at assessment design or data analysis? Maybe it's lesson planning, maybe it's pacing, maybe it's really engaging young people. And so take a minute to reflect about your strengths. And/or you can answer this question: what have you learned about work-life balance or self-care? We've talked, a lot of people have put into the chats about overwhelm and just feeling over busy and just so much going on. And I think that that's really important for mentoring young people, because they kind of don't really know where sort of work ends and begins, and some of that has to do with them, with the desire for purpose, and they choose a job because it's like a calling versus simply a way to make money and support their sort of real life, as well as technology and how much technology has entered into your home, into your personal life. How many of you, I'm sure, have been on vacation where somebody, maybe even yourself, I'm guilty, has worked from vacation, which would be unheard of for my parents. And then finally, how do you demonstrate continuous growth? So, for example, you're attending this webinar, so I know that the people who are on this listening or participating in this webinar do have continuous growth, and that's really important. So I'm just going to play music for about a minute and let you guys reflect on these questions. Which of these things are your strengths? And if you'd like, go ahead and chat into the group chat box. All right, awesome. Wow, some really great things you guys are saying in the chat. So what I'm seeing is a bit of, it's really fast, so it's hard to read because there's a lot of people on, but I'm seeing a lot of people admit that they don't have work-life balance. And so that's really interesting. And I see some of you even goal setting that you want to do more self-care or more sort of putting more boundaries. And so just looking at the chat, some of the advice that people have is giving parents and students set times when they can contact you. And so I think that's really great with cell phones, is turning it on silent and walking away. Definitely something that research has shown to be really helpful in not checking your email right before. People check their email right before bed or right when they wake up, and things like that have been shown to be not great habits. And so thinking about different ways that you can continue to grow. So a lot of people are saying different ideas that they have, like they listen to podcasts, they do lots of continuous growth to sort of get at that third question. And I think one of the things that I wanted to share is just how people are really working together to support each other, and I think that's really awesome. Several people said that they tweak their lesson plans year after year, and so I think that's really important, is that, especially as a teacher trainer, that what you're doing is not, you don't need to throw everything out. It's a lot of tweaking things that you did previous years. Saving your resources, using them in interesting ways is really huge. So that's great. Thank you all for sharing. And then this one's hard to read, but that's why I put in the resource section a link to my website, edtosavetheworld.com, because I have on the resources page, if you scroll down sort of the third bucket of resources, is at least 5 different sort of self-reflection surveys that help you to really reflect. And so this one in particular is on equitable classrooms. And so I identified 5 areas. This is from the 2 books that I currently have published. 5 areas that really help for equity in the classroom, and that's often something that's really important to younger teachers. And so here's some self-reflection. And the first one is really about my attitudes and my behaviors towards students who are struggling. And so research has shown that identifying 1 or 2 students at a time to really focus on, and even things like smiling more, seating them closer to you, putting your hands on their shoulder, asking them to explain their thinking and their reasoning, diving deep into their answers and not just saying like, oh, okay, you gave me any answer, I'm going to accept, but really pushing those students has shown to be very powerful. The next one is about clarity. So how clear are you? And this is definitely growth for me. How clear am I in my goals for students? How clear are my instructions? That's my growth area. How clear are my instructions? And how much do my assessments exactly and specifically measure what it is that I want, and to make sure that I don't have any excess sort of noise in my assessments. And the next one is related to the evidence collection, but of constantly collecting evidence about students and seeing where they are, and sort of tweaking your instruction based on where students are. I think we often, especially at the secondary level, I think we often wait too long. We'll go, a month without sort of doing lots of informal checking for understanding to see where students are. And so this is one way you can reflect. And then finally, differentiated activities. How often do I differentiate? And that last one is really about equity. Do I have the same kids in the same groups? Or are my groups really flexible and I'm mixing students up? And so that's a great reflection tool that you might want to use for reflecting on your own practice, or you can use it with new teachers to really think about what you're doing as far as equitable classrooms. And then this image is of someone going fishing. And I recently had the pleasure of hearing Dr. Marcia Tate deliver a keynote speech, and she said in thinking about what activities you like versus what activities students like, she says you should think about it like this. When you go fishing, do you use bait that you like, or do you use bait that the fish like? And I just thought that was such a great way to think about it. And I think it's a great way to think about mentoring new teachers. So rather than what do I want the new teachers to sort of grow in, versus really thinking about what does the new teacher that I'm mentoring want? And I'm going to use the sort of bait, if you will, to use this analogy, but I'm going to think about what this new teacher wants. And often people have found that millennials or young teachers, people in their 20s today, they want impact and they want to contribute now. And so it's not just about title and recognition and rising up the ranks, but they want to feel like they have a voice and they want to feel like they're contributing. And so I think the biggest thing, biggest piece of advice I would give to mentors is to open yourself up to learn from them just as much as they are learning from you. And that's something that I think is often very hard for veteran teachers, because we remember when we were 22 years old, we remember that how much we struggled, how much we've learned and grown. And so the tendency is just to sort of have this very hierarchical relationship where we're going to just tell teachers what they need to be doing. And that can be quite frustrating for a young teacher, because they have perspective, they have experience, they have ideas. And so opening yourself up for learning and growing with your new teachers is super smart all around. Not only will it get more buy-in from them, but it'll also help you to improve your own practice and your own growth. And another way of putting this I thought of is this blind men with the elephant analogy. So you may have heard of this. There's different versions of it, but blind men all touching a different part of an elephant, and someone asking them, what is an elephant like? And, the person in the back touching the leg says, well, an elephant is very much like a tree. And the person at the top holding the tail says, no, an elephant is much more like a rope, and so forth. And so, this was originated, I believe, in India, and it was made famous by Rumi, the philosopher. And, it's really just helping us to realize that biases can blind us, and it warns us against sort of feeling like we have the absolute truth And really, I think the overall message I like from this is that together we can get a more complete picture of the true nature of things if we work together, if we take different people's perspectives. And so that sort of leads me to this next piece. This is from a new teacher in North Carolina that I met on Twitter. And he said he loved his relationship with his mentor. So I said, okay, let's talk, let's connect via email, and I want to hear about your relationship with your mentor. And what's really cool about Trevor is that his mentor was his teacher when he was young. And so how cool is that? So his current teacher mentor was actually his teacher in school when he was in grade school. And so I share Trevor's email signature with you because I think like this is so cool. This is the way of the world. I mean, all these things down here are badges that he's received for training that he's taken on using technology in the classroom. And so it might be an overgeneralization to say all young people are tech savvy, but I think in general, the younger people that I've come across, they know more programs, software, websites, tools, applications to actually make teaching easier and more engaging for students. And so I think if you're thinking about ways to open yourself up to learning and growing from new teachers, technology is one great way to go. Another thing they really are into is subscriptions. And so even making your life more efficient and easier. For example, food subscriptions like HelloFresh delivers groceries and recipes portioned out right to your door, or even Stitch Fix, things like that deliver new clothes right to your door, and you can keep the ones you like and send the ones you don't like back. But, young people have more efficient ways of doing things that we might not be aware of. And so really getting to know their perspective I think is a really good idea. And also, we can remember that they're closer in age and in experience to the students that we're teaching. And so I often use getting to know their perspective helps me to reach my students better. And so I think that's another way you can think about it. And so I'll do the same thing again. I'll just put on some music again for another minute and give you some time to do some goal setting. So if you are a new teacher, maybe think about this from the perspective of what might you learn from your veteran teachers or from your mentor teachers. And then if you're a veteran teacher, what might you learn from younger teachers? And so the first question is, how might you learn from younger teachers? What is it that you might want to learn from them? Could you ask a younger teacher to give you feedback on a particular aspect of your work? And then finally, how could you set this up like as a regular system for two-way feedback and idea sharing? Maybe you rotate whose class you visit and whose class or whose lesson plans you talk about. Maybe you rotate in meetings, bringing a different dilemma about teaching or the profession to the meeting where you guys get to all brainstorm. And so I'm just going to give you guys another minute to think through what might you do in order to learn and grow from younger teachers. And if you would like, you can go ahead and put it in there, which some of you are doing, saying new technologies, new websites. Okay, great. Thank you guys for sharing. So a lot of you were saying in the comment section that that technology, asking younger teachers to give you some ideas around smart boards, around Google Classroom, different things like that, as well as other things. Some people are saying just sort of keep up with what young people are into these days. What I find like pop culture, I mean, I'm just so out of touch with things like that. And so sort of running ideas by a new teacher about what's popular out there, who are sort of different song artists or movie stars that they're kind of popular right now, I think is a great idea that some of you are putting in there. So that's really, really wonderful that you all are here today, so you're super open to learning. And so I'm loving seeing the ideas that you guys are saying in the comment section. And so this is a picture of a SpaceX Shuttle that is exploring space. And so I'm using this to really illustrate the idea of how do we prepare these young people, Generation Z and Alphas is what I'm seeing people calling them now. How do we work together to prepare kids for the world that we're not real sure what it's going to look like when they graduate from high school? And so I'm going to just bring it to the founder of SpaceX, Elon Musk, who says basically his two-step process for innovation is you deconstruct knowledge into fundamental principles and you apply those principles to new fields. And so that's been my passion for curriculum design over the last several years. And this triangle is from John Hattie's work, where he's looking at surface of learning and the amount of surface of learning necessary in order to do deep learning and transfer of learning. And this is getting more and more popular. I just went to a sold-out conference last week in Chicago for the annual Visible Learning Conference, and people were talking about transfer like never before, which is really exciting for me because this has been my passion for a while. And a lot of curriculum models are shifting to this notion that deep learning happens when students make relationships between transferable concepts and ideas, and that's how they're able to transfer their learning to new situations. So the Common Core and lots of states have adopted their own version of this, but it's very similar. So likely, if you're in the United States, your state has some standards that are moving in this direction. Also, the International Baccalaureate has been a concept-based curriculum since its founding, and even advanced placement assessments and even the SAT is going more in this direction. So it's only a matter of time that if we want to be ahead of the curve, really thinking about transfer of learning, what are the strategies that get kids to be able to transfer their learning, then we're going to be better able to mentor new teachers and better able to teach our young people. And so this is a quote, transfer always involves reflective thought in abstracting from one context and seeking connections with others, which is very similar to what Elon Musk says is his principles. And this was said by Perkins and Solomon in a paper called Teaching for Transfer all the way back in 1988. And so this is sort of my passion for curriculum design, is really looking at, I used to think very linearly in curriculum design. I had my topic and I broke it down and I taught it, and then I tested each subtopic. And now I think about it more like these concentric circles. So I have my abstract question and the principles that I want to get at, that the research says is really the way in which kids transfer their learning. And then I think of different contexts that I'm going to take them through so that it really deepens their understanding. And a lot of ed schools are even going in this direction. And it can be frustrating for a new teacher to have a better way of doing things and then sort of get told by a veteran teacher, no, you're supposed to be doing it this way. And so I wanted just to briefly share some of this thinking with you all so that if you are veteran teachers, this might be something that you might want to consider. And so if I go back to this slide here, Perkins and Solomon call what they say low road transfer is when students transfer to really similar tasks versus high road transfer when students transfer to more dissimilar tasks. And what they say is that if we don't sort of ask students specifically to abstract to broader ideas and principles that can be transferred, then they are really unable to transfer to dissimilar tasks. So when we stay at the surface level, which is just sort of facts and basic skills, then we're not able to help students to be able to transfer their learning. And so I added this other dimension of the academic versus the real world transfer. And so it's up here in this top right quadrant, which is where innovation happens, where there are students transferring to highly dissimilar real world scenarios. So if you go to my website, there's a bunch of resources for that. And so these are the 3 steps. Basically, write a big idea or a relationship between 2 or more concepts, turn it into an abstract question, and then use those fact-rich contexts to illuminate the relationship. So if you're interested in this, you might want to check out my other webinar from Share My Lesson if you haven't already, because I go into more detail about this 3-step process for learning transfer. And finally, in my books, I have ways in which students can take action. So if you look at sort of step 5 in this way to create an assessment, students really today want to do something with their learning. And so really thinking about how they can take action is something that I'm really passionate about. And so that's it. That's all I have for you guys. If you go to my website, you can see a lot of resources and tools that I've just sort of touched on here. And I want to end with my grandmother dancing at my wedding to Lady Gaga with her cane in the air, because I just think it's so illustrative that if she can enter into the 21st century with such passion, then we can too. And so that's something I want to just sort of end with to give us all some inspiration. She was 93 at the time, dancing to Lady Gaga with her cane in the air. And so with that, I think we have about just a couple minutes to answer any questions. And so if you guys have some specific questions, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for such a great presentation. It was really great to meet your grandma, too. I'd like everyone who has questions to please go now to the question and answer widget at the bottom and type in your questions for Julie. We will answer as many as we can. Also, you should now be able to download your professional development certificate if you've answered the poll questions in this webinar. It's best that you do this now before you log out of the session. You must be on a laptop or desktop to access this certification. Okay, and now we're going to go to our first question. Julie, your first question is, what advice do you have for matching new teachers with specific mentors?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think the main thing is to make sure that teachers want to be mentors and really help them to think through how they're going to be positive about this. And so I think the main thing is asking veteran teachers, don't make them do it. You know, ask them if they'd like to be a mentor, and then provide some resources and training for them. And then you can do some creative things like trying to match up people by discipline area, or you might want to mix it up. And so, you know, you can sort of ask your veteran teachers what they think would be the best way to set up their relationships. But I think my biggest advice is don't force any veteran teachers to be mentors.
Excellent. We have a question here from Tammy in New York City. Do you have any Smartboard webinars?
That's a great question. I don't personally have any Smartboard webinars, but I think you can look through the webinar section of Share My Lesson, and there might be something particularly on Smartboards. But that's a really good question.
Okay. And then we have from Claudia. She would like to know, how can we not have resistance from the veteran teachers to join this mentors program?
Very good question. I mean, I think often when I get questions like about resistance, I encourage leaders to start with those who are likely to be excited about it and don't force it. And then over time, it should, you know, the veteran teachers who are excited about it and are volunteering are probably going to share their enthusiasm, and over time more veteran teachers will want to do it. And so I think starting with the people who are enthusiastic about it is always my advice for any sort of change. And then I think over time the enthusiasm will grow. And then it's really sort of for the hardcore resistors to any change, I think it's about connecting what's important to them. And so for a lot of these people, maybe they're concerned about sort of the state of the world. Maybe they're concerned about the lack of responsibility or whatever it is that they're concerned about, and sort of appealing to that aspect to say, hey, look what you'd be contributing to if you were to agree to be a mentor teacher. Or maybe they're concerned, maybe they love their discipline, maybe they're super passionate about physics or whatever it is, but really helping them to see how they're spreading their own knowledge and passions by being a veteran teacher.
Excellent.
And
Terry would like to know.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You finish.
I was just saying, somebody saying in the chat that veteran teachers thrive on being tasked with something. So that feeling that they're still valued is important. So I thought that was great to share.
Right. And Terry would like to know, how can we get past the technology challenges in the classroom?
I'm not sure if you mean by that like the reality of automation, or if you mean by that. So maybe you'll have to email me specifically what you mean by that question. So I'm not sure if it's technology is needed or students are distracted. So I'm not sure exactly what that question is asking.
Okay. And Sherry from Baltimore would like to know, what webinar platform are you using? I can answer that, but you go ahead, Julie.
Go ahead, Susan. No, you go ahead, Susan.
The platform we utilize, Ms. Sherry, is called On24, and it's an exceptional platform. If you'd like to know more, you can talk to the Share My Lesson team, and we'll speak to you about it.
Yeah, for sure. It's
and
a
I
great
think
platform
that the last question will be, what are some good resources for the mentor relationship?
That's a great question. So I think sharing a book together. So what I would always recommend is asking the new teacher what things they're interested in. So say they're interested in learning more about classroom management, which is often something high on the list for new teachers, that you would get a book together and do sort of like a book study together. And so one of the books that my publisher, Corwin Press, has is Real Talk About Classroom Management. So whatever it is that you'd be getting a resource together. But I hope to be writing a book soon on mentoring, specifically for mentoring teachers. But thank you guys so much. I think we have to sign off. I just want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank Susan for hosting.